What can be said about Doom that hasn't already been said? A game that defined a genre, a game that inspired generations of soon-to-be game developers, and a game that set the trend for the future of PC gaming. A game that made software geeks into pop culture icons. In the wake of Doom, video games were changed forever, and for the better. Spawning out of the massive wake of Doom's success, Doom 2 rode the wave of hype and glory all until it faded into a distant memory of a sequel. I played the shit out of Doom, but back then, who didn't? Doom 1 released when I was only 9 years old, and in my house computer games were a part of my life. My father spent his income on computers as long as I can remember. In fact, one of the earliest memories was me watching him play Law of the West on the Commodore 64. Video games were a way of life in our house. My father used to play video games so much that my older brother and I used to wake up extra early in the morning just so we could get some time in before my dad woke up. We lived about an hour away from the nearest software store. About 6 months after playing Doom for the first time, I found a 500 watt level pack CD at that store. Man, did we get use out of it. That summer, my brother and I played hundreds of hours of Doom between the two of us thanks to that CD. I'm not trying to be too nostalgic, but I'm really trying to paint the picture of how important Doom was for me growing up. We fuddled our way through Level Editor and taught ourselves design, and although we were really bad at it, we enjoyed it. If I recall correctly, by the time I was 10 and played Doom 2, I really barely remember it. And it's probably for good reason, because I'd played so many custom WADs. Doom 2 really didn't have anything that drastically different from the original. Maybe it was the fact that I had enough Doom in a lifetime at that point in my life, but maybe it was how little the game changed. Mechanically, anyone who's ever played either title knows the original Doom is damn near perfect. But other than the new levels, Doom 2 barely brings anything new to the game. But I can't fault id Software too much. In those days, developers had to cash in on quick sequels to make any money because PC games were such a niche market compared to other options. And because their audience was incredibly narrow, most software developers were contracted by publishers to make a certain number of titles. So the games were short and sweet, and sequels are generally nothing more than map or level packs. Some of you may recall Wolf 3D had a sequel called Spear of Destiny, which plays exactly like the original, save for different levels and bosses. And as history goes, Doom is where they struck it big. Built on the shareware model, the two Johns and the rest of id Software churned out another sequel as they had done with their other franchises in the past, trying to capitalize as quickly as possible. But rather than making a few bucks, they made millions with minimal effort. Doom 2 was id's first retail release found in big box retailers like Walmart. I took a look at the numbers, and although I shouldn't be surprised, I was kind of floored at how many copies Doom 2 has actually sold to date. I understand that Doom has been released for every operating system and platform known to man, but I didn't see a lot of re-releases for Doom 2. Other than console ports and Ultimate Doom collections, we didn't see a port of Doom 2 to the N64. We didn't see it for a lot of other platforms either. And honestly, I don't think it really deserved it either. PC Gamer will regularly feature mods on their website for various classic titles such as Thief, Deus Ex, and even Doom. The latest article previewed the 20th release of the Brutal Doom mod that is currently in development. I figured, what the hell, I'll give Doom 2 a run, but with a twist. Since version 20 wasn't out yet, I opted for the most recent bug-free version, which was version 19. Doom 2 feels like an expansion pack rather than a sequel. A custom WAD almost. In vanilla Doom 2, all we really get is one new weapon, faster opening doors, 8 new enemies, and 32 new levels. While there are a few new textures, no new features exist. No mouse look, no jumping, no crouching, nothing new mechanically. No change in resolution, level size, slopes, or sounds. Choosing to revisit Doom 2 but with a twist, I used GZDoom to utilize the mod, giving the game a facelift in every way imaginable but keeping the core of the game intact. 10 years ago I would have said I could still use my arrow keys, control, and space, but I'm far too accustomed to mouse look controls that I would pretty much not play any shooter without them. Essentially, Brutal Doom and GZDoom bring Doom into the modern age with improved resolutions, mouse look, and all other kinds of shit to give it just enough flair to make it feel fresh again. From launch, the game actually plays the same, so you have to map your WSAD, mouse look, and incorporated secondary fire to all your keys. You can jump, reload, execute your enemies. You can do shit like flipping the bird right before kicking a Pinky Duke Nukem style. It's hilarious, and it's over the top, and it's clear from the second that you start the game that Doom Guy is a new kind of badass.
Go fuck yourself!
The kind of badass that exists in the Doom comic books or stories, where against all odds it takes some kind of super soldier to win. You know, the angry, jaded ones where muscles bulge with veins and the hero's dialogue is straight out of a teenage boy's idea of an action movie. The one-liners are so ridiculous that shifting Doom to not take itself seriously is a lot of fun. Even John Carmack himself said that the game is a twist between Evil Dead 2, and Aliens. I don't think that Doom was ever supposed to be taken seriously. It's supposed to be more of a campy action horror type of experience. In campy horror titles like Evil Dead and Dead Alive, limbs can be pulled off and heads have the consistency of watermelons. In sci-fi action monoliths like Alien, we get all kinds of machine guns, explosions, and gunfights. And with the brutal Doom mod, both of these styles are amplified tenfold. Enemies now have hitboxes, so you can blow off limbs or headshot most of the humanoids, sometimes leaving them crippled enough just to continue shooting or suffering to their last breath. Blood splatters against ceilings and walls, drips down with distinct splishes and splashes. You can kick your enemies into mush and kill them in so many ways, it's just fucking awesome. For anyone who's ever read the Doom books, this is how the Doom guy was portrayed. Doom has aged well for being over 20 years old, but you can't look at it now and take it seriously. Unfortunately, Doom was taken seriously back when it was released, being chastised by the media for being played by the Columbine shooters, and all other kinds of weird media exposure for being hyper-violent and dangerous. But I think that Brutal Doom really captures the essence of what Doom was intended to be. Every detail was well thought out, especially the sound. Iconic sounds from other id games have been incorporated, such as the armor pickup sound from Quake and the BFG ignition from Doom 3. Every gun has a ton of kick, so much oomph, and the sounds are just perfect to match them. Explosions have weight, and when you fire off that double barrel shotty, it actually has a recoil effect that knocks you backwards. There is an accessory audio pack that has cover versions for every single track, so you can't help but smile as you mow down imps and zombies with an accompanying iconic metal soundtrack. The original Doom was known for heavily mimicking the sounds of metal artists such as Pantera and Megadeth, but Doom 2 had an all-original soundtrack. And the metal covers for these tracks does it all justice. I highly recommend it. Of the few things that I remember about Doom 2, it was the horde of enemies that were thrown at you. Wave after wave of teleporting imps and pinkies are a constant. With the increased speed of fireballs, leaping melee attacks, and an added number of projectiles, almost every enemy is hardened to have some kind of behavior perk making them more than just shotgun fodder. Aside from the nightmare difficulty in vanilla Doom, ultraviolence is very manageable, but Brutal Doom adds new difficulty levels to challenge even the most elite Doom players. After being on a difficult game kick, I welcomed the challenge, but I had to restart Doom 2 to the second highest difficulty a few levels in. Reloading your pump shotgun is something you never even thought about before. Since you're used to plugging away endlessly, the faster, deadlier enemies change the game just enough to change the way you run and gun. There are new weapons, including the Mancubus cannon and locking Revenant rockets, but more of a novelty that Nazi MP40 is a crappier machine gun than the chain gun. But the aforementioned weapons are pretty powerful. Luckily, the balance is kept in place, requiring you to give your enemies to get ammunition for the cannon or shoulder rockets. The rocket launcher has a smaller blast radius, requiring you to really aim properly, and the plasma rifle has a really short clip. Even the BFG doesn't hit everything in sight and requires a little bit of aiming. The power-ups and ammunition are relatively the same, save for the fact that invisibility orbs have been changed to tied up marines. If you melee the stake they're tied to, they'll join you in battle. In some of the later levels, this is almost a necessity, because some of them are just ludicrous, with hordes showing up Serious Sam style. The Marines talk to you, they make weird comments, and they just tear shit up. They rip off enemies' heads, they pummel them into the ground, but unfortunately they don't follow you to the next level, leaving you solo after their assistance. With all these changes, the levels more or less play the same. Other than a few levels that require the old school speedrunning over gaps, you can break a few levels by jumping to platforms that you would otherwise have to puzzle your way through a series of switches, keycards, and elevators. Sadly, the game started to wear on me halfway through. I got really bored. Perhaps because it's been such a long time since I played it last, I'm just not really impressed with the level design. In Doom, you were on a moon base in Mars, but this time around, you pick up on Earth where the previous game left off. Because this takes place on Earth, trying to mimic modern buildings and architecture feels out of place. The engine doesn't allow for cohesive building design. Since no improvements were made to the engine, a lot of the inner city portions became stale and repetitive. I know Duke Nukem 3D came out a little over a year later, but buildings and urban levels felt so much more organized. Small details like bathroom textures and fixtures completed the design appropriately, where Doom was just big open boxes with windows and wide open spaces. Doom 1 worked because it had the privilege of a fictional space setting, but trying to emulate the look of real buildings falls flat. The lack of foliage, street pops, and small detail to pull it all together is absent. I really hate calling them buildings because they're more just like boxes containing monsters, really. But what could have been part of the bigger problem is the fact that John Romero wasn't heavily involved in the level design. According to the book Masters of Doom, John Romero wanted to coast on the success of Doom after launch, while John Carmack wanted to do some engine work. John Romero was too busy basking in the glory of Doom, spending more time playing it and promoting it than actually coding it. For anyone who's a big fan of the original id games, Masters of Doom gives a lot of insight to the genius and dynamic of the two and the development of their games. I highly recommend it. Romero only designed 6 levels this time around, and I found his to have the most interesting and challenging designs. Levels like O of Destruction or Gotcha had really interesting gimmicks, like having to backtrack through wide open areas or throwing interesting unique level challenges at you. The secret levels in the game are more Easter egg tributes to Wolfenstein, with one of them being an exact replication of Wolf 3D's first level. For the most part, most of the levels have some really shitty design. There was one part of the game where I was literally stuck because I had to shoot a symbol on a wall to open a door with a non-door looking texture. Now, this would have been fine if the game had trained the player to look for these and shoot them by introducing it earlier in the game, but this is just one isolated incident. It's really odd and just poor design. There's parts where cliffs are just narrow elevated walls, and levels where it's just a horde fest. I mean, everything started to feel samey to me, and I was getting really bored with it, but my rule is I can't review a game unless I complete it. So I pressed on and finished the game. The final level, Icon of Sin, was a pretty poor excuse for a final boss, acting as nothing more than a target on the wall with warping enemies. They could have done so much better. I mean, the name of the last boss sounds so badass. It's the Icon of Sin. But what a letdown. You shoot a rocket 3 times into the wall's forehead, or you can no-clip through the wall to kill John Romero for the same ending. But either way, it has the same feel. Haphazardly thrown together, much like most of the levels from Doom 2. I wanted the authentic vanilla level design experience, and luckily the Brutal Doom mod keeps the Icon of Sin the original level. Brutal Doom 2 had a completely revamped final level for some of the earlier versions, being thrust against a giant embodiment of death and destruction. The end boss could have been so much better. Anything would have been better. And even more disappointing is that we don't get a cool picture of the Doom guy after it all ends like we do in the original. Going back to Doom 2 after all these years, even with the improvements, really doesn't do it for me. It's kind of funny, nostalgia washes over me when I play and talk about Doom, but when I talk about Doom 2, I find myself being much more critical of it. I just can't think of it the same way. It's probably because it didn't capture the magic and awe of what computer games were meant to be like its predecessor, but Doom 2 wasn't a very good game as far as sequels go. Even by today's standards, if you exclude yearly sports games and yearly release titles from discussion, most every sequel brings something drastically new to the game. Doom was never about narrative, so without any story changes you have mechanics, levels, neither of which stray far from the beaten path blazed a year earlier. Think of Diablo, Fear, or MechWarrior, and think of how much new content each iteration of the series offered compared to its predecessor. Even looking at the big blockbuster developers of today, consider Far Cry 3 versus Far Cry 4. At least Ubisoft bothered to reskin the whole game rather than just add more levels to the same island. And yes, I know, it's not quite apples to apples, but if Far Cry 4 was on the same island with the same enemies, 32 new missions, 1 new gun, and 8 new enemies, how do you think the public would receive it today? My guess is horribly. Furthermore, going even closer with a case comparison, using franchises that are mechanically strong, such as the Soul series, each sequel or spiritual successor maintains the core mechanics and make playing it familiar, but adding new content making the experience unfamiliar every time. Whether it's Demon Souls, Dark Souls, or Bloodborne. Doom 2 is an old game, and by those standards it is a great sequel, but by today's standards Doom 2 would have been crucified for how little it brought to the table. Luckily, Doom 2 mechanically is identical to its predecessor. In an era where it was held on such a high pedestal compared to everything else, the public was too blind to notice its faults. It isn't a bad game by any means, but as far as sequels go, it's not a great game. One thing I am sure of though, is it rode the coattails of Doom into the horizon, mimicking it at almost every turn, earning it a spot in history as a sequel to one of the greatest games ever. And for that, it will always be held in high regard. Thanks for watching.